Father Anthony had always believed his path was clear. At 47, he had dedicated over 2 decades of his life to the church, serving as a priest in a small, tight-knit parish in the English countryside. His days were filled with the quiet rituals of his faith, morning prayers, confessionals, tending to the spiritual needs of his flock. The church was his sanctuary, a place where he found purpose and peace. But beneath his calm exterior, there was a restlessness that he kept buried, a longing that he didn't fully understand. It wasn't until Isabel Summers arrived in the village that everything began to change. Isabel was 29, a writer seeking solace and inspiration after the sudden death of her father. She rented a cottage on the outskirts of the village, hoping the tranquility of the countryside would help her heal and rekindle her creativity. The first time she attended Mass, it was more out of curiosity than devotion. She'd never been particularly religious, but the church, with its ancient stone walls and the soft glow of candlelight, drew her in. Father Anthony noticed her immediately. Her presence was like a breath of fresh air in the old, familiar congregation. She sat quietly in the back, her head slightly bowed, but he could see the spark in her eyes. The same spark he had once seen in himself when he first felt the call to the priesthood. After the service, she approached him with a tentative smile. "Father Anthony, that was a beautiful sermon," Isabel said softly. "I'm not really religious, but something about your words. They moved me." Father Anthony smiled warmly, his heart unexpectedly fluttering at her words. "Thank you, Isabel. I'm glad you found it meaningful. If you ever want to talk, my door is always open." Isabel nodded, and for a moment they stood in a comfortable silence, the sounds of the departing congregation fading around them. There was something about her, a quiet strength, a depth of feeling, that intrigued him. It had been years since he had felt such a connection with anyone, and it unsettled him. Over the following weeks, Isabel began attending Mass regularly, often staying afterward to talk with Father Anthony. Their conversations were initially about faith and philosophy, but they soon began to delve into more personal topics. Isabel spoke of her father, of the pain of losing him, and the loneliness that had settled in her heart. Father Anthony listened, offering comfort and guidance, but with each conversation, he found himself drawn more deeply to her. Isabel too felt the pull between them. Father Anthony was unlike anyone she had ever met, kind, wise, and gentle, with an air of serenity that put her at ease. Yet, beneath his calm exterior, she sensed a deep well of emotion, something that he kept hidden even from himself. As their friendship grew, so did her feelings for him, feelings that she knew were forbidden but couldn't ignore. One evening, after a particularly emotional discussion about loss and grief, Isabel lingered in the church longer than usual. The setting sun cast a warm, golden light through the stained glass windows, bathing the church in an ethereal glow. Father Anthony had just finished locking up when he noticed her standing by the altar, lost in thought. "Isabel," he called softly, his voice echoing in the empty church. She turned to him, her eyes glistening with unshed tears. "I don't know why, but I feel closer to my father here in this place, with you." Father Anthony walked toward her, his heart aching at the vulnerability in her voice. "This is a place of peace, of connection. It's natural to feel that way." Isabel looked up at him, her expression filled with a mixture of longing and confusion. "But it's not just that, Anthony. It's you. I feel something for you that I shouldn't. I know it's wrong, but I can't help it." Her words hung in the air between them, and Father Anthony felt his breath catch in his throat. He had sensed her growing feelings, just as he had felt his own, but hearing them spoken out loud made it real, undeniable. "Isabel," he began, his voice trembling slightly, "I've taken vows. My life is dedicated to the church, to God. What you're feeling, what I'm feeling, it can't be." Isabel nodded, tears spilling down her cheeks. I know it's impossible, but I can't pretend it's not there. I've tried to push it away, but it's only grown stronger. Father Anthony reached out, hesitating for a moment before gently brushing a tear from her cheek. The touch was tender, almost reverent, and it sent a shiver down Isabel's spine. She leaned into his hand, closing her eyes, and for a moment they stood like that, the world outside the church fading away. "I'm so sorry, Isabel," he whispered, his voice thick with emotion. "I never meant for this to happen." Isabel opened her eyes, her gaze locking with his. "I'm not sorry," she said quietly. "I'm not sorry that I met you, that I feel this way. Even if we can't be together, I'm grateful for the time we've spent. You've helped me heal in ways I didn't think were possible." Father Anthony felt his resolve crumbling. The weight of his vows, the years of devotion to his faith, all seemed to pale in comparison to the intensity of the emotions swirling within him. He had never felt so torn, so conflicted. He knew what was right, but the pull of his heart was stronger than he had ever imagined. Without thinking, he leaned in and pressed his lips to hers. The kiss was soft, tentative, but it carried the weight of everything they had both been holding back. Isabel responded immediately, her hands sliding up to cup his face as she deepened the kiss. For a brief, blissful moment, they lost themselves in each other, the world around them disappearing. But reality soon crashed back in. Father Anthony pulled away, his chest heaving with the force of his emotions. "I can't. We can't do this, Isabel. It's not right." Isabel nodded, her own breathing unsteady. I know it's wrong, but it felt so right." Father Anthony looked at her, his eyes filled with a mixture of longing and anguish. "This isn't just about us. I've made a commitment to my faith, to my parish. I can't betray that, no matter how much I care for you." Isabel swallowed hard, tears once again spilling over. "So what do we do? Do we just pretend this never happened? Do we just go back to being strangers?" "I don't know," Father Anthony admitted, his voice barely above a whisper. "But we have to stop before this goes any further. We have to find a way to move on, to let go." Isabel nodded, but the pain in her chest was almost unbearable. She had known this was how it would end, but it didn't make it any easier. "I'll try," she said, her voice breaking. "But I don't know how to forget you, Anthony." He closed his eyes, struggling to keep his own emotions in check. "I don't want you to forget me, Isabel, but we have to find a way to live with this, to accept that some things aren't meant to be." With that, he turned and walked away, leaving Isabel standing alone in the dimly lit church. The door closed behind him with a soft click, the sound echoing in the empty space. Isabel stood there for a long time, her heart heavy with the weight of their impossible love. In the weeks that followed, Isabel tried to avoid Father Anthony as much as possible. She stopped attending Mass, stopped visiting the church altogether. The distance was painful, but it was necessary. She threw herself into her writing, trying to channel her emotions into her work, but the words wouldn't come. Every time she sat down to write, her thoughts drifted back to Anthony, to the way his lips had felt against hers, to the pain in his eyes as he walked away. Father Anthony too was struggling. He went through the motions of his daily duties, but his heart wasn't in it. He couldn't stop thinking about Isabel, about the way her presence had brought light into his life in a way he hadn't felt in years. He prayed for guidance, for the strength to move on, but the ache in his heart remained. One evening, after a long day of wrestling with his thoughts, Father Anthony found himself standing outside Isabel's cottage. He knew he shouldn't be there, knew that this was a step too far, but he couldn't stay away. He knocked on the door, his heart pounding in his chest. When Isabel opened the door and saw him standing there, her eyes widened in surprise. "Anthony." "Isabel," he said, his voice trembling. "I know I shouldn't be here, but I can't do this anymore. I can't pretend that I don't feel anything for you." Isabel stepped aside, allowing him to enter. They stood in the small living room, the air between them thick with unspoken emotions. "What do we do now?" she asked softly, her heart racing. Father Anthony shook his head, tears glistening in his eyes. "I don't know. All I know is that I love you, Isabel. I know it's wrong, but I can't help it. I've tried to fight it, but it's stronger than me." Isabel felt her own tears begin to fall as she stepped closer to him, her hand reaching out to gently touch his face. "I love you too, Anthony. I've loved you from the moment we met, and I don't want to lose you." They stood like that for a long moment, the world around them fading away as they held each other. Then, without a word, Father Anthony leaned in and kissed her again, this time with all the passion and longing he had been holding back. Isabel responded with equal fervour, her hands tangling in his hair as she pulled him closer. That night, they gave in to the feelings they had been denying for so long. It was a night of passion, of love, of two souls finding solace in each other. For those few hours, nothing else mattered. Neither their vows nor the consequences of their actions. All that existed was the love they shared, the connection that had drawn them together despite the obstacles. But as dawn broke, reality came crashing back. Father Anthony lay beside Isabel, his heart heavy with the knowledge of what they had done. He loved her more than he had ever loved anyone, but he also knew that their love was forbidden, that it came with a price. Isabel too felt the weight of their actions. She turned to Anthony, her eyes filled with both love and sorrow. "What do we do now, Anthony? We can't keep living like this, in secret, in fear." Father Anthony nodded, his expression somber. "You're right, we can't. But I don't know how to leave you, Isabel. I don't know how to go back to a life without you." Isabel reached out, taking his hand in hers. "Maybe you don't have to. Maybe we can find a way to be together, to build a life that's true to both of us." Father Anthony looked at her, hope flickering in his eyes. "You mean, leave the church?" Isabel nodded, her heart aching at the thought. "If it means being with you, then yes, but only if it's what you truly want, Anthony. I don't want you to give up everything for me unless you're sure." Father Anthony was silent for a long moment, his mind racing with the enormity of the decision before him. He had devoted his life to the church, to his faith, but now he was faced with a choice between that life and the love he had found with Isabel. It was a choice he never thought he would have to make, and it tore at his very soul. Finally he spoke, his voice filled with both determination and fear. "I don't know what the future holds, Isabel, but I know that I can't live without you. I'll talk to the bishop, see what my options are. But no matter what, I want to be with you." Isabel smiled through her tears, her heart swelling with love for the man beside her. "Whatever happens, we'll face it together. I love you, Anthony, and I'll stand by you no matter what." With that, they held each other close, the weight of their decision heavy on their hearts. They didn't know what the future would bring, but for the first time in a long while, they felt a sense of peace, knowing that they would face it together, hand in hand.